How's it going? Today is Thursday. You know what that means. This is Bitcoin and Politics Day. And do I have a doozy of a show waiting for you guys? Oh, by the way, I'm sure you guys know Bitcoin continues to rock it up. That's why I got my Don't Fight the Fibs, thanks to my good friend Fibbo20. But before I get into the show and all that, let me thank our sponsor, Round the X. Round the X, you're doing a phenomenal job of giving us the ability to stack sats by rounding up our purchases and putting that in Satoshis. If you guys head over to Round the X and use the code Bitcoin in Bitcoin Politics, you're going to get $4 in Bitcoin. So with that, let's get on with this elaborate show I got for you guys. Okay, let's see. I think I might have lost my headset there. Okay, I think it might be it. Let's see. Test 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me, producer? Okay, you can. Perfect. Okay, great. Okay, so as you guys know, the news came out recently about Arizona senator trying to once again push a bill through to make Bitcoin legal tender. This has created a bunch of conversation, and it's making me wonder what is really going on with Bitcoin as legal tender, and do we really need Bitcoin to be legal tender? For that, I'm going to take us through a slew of content that's talking about Bitcoin and the legal tender status. So where I want to start is with Japan. And the reason I want to start with Japan, as you can see this article from CoinDesk, this is back in 2017, you guys, March 31st, 2017. They were saying that tomorrow, which would be April 1st, and it was not an April Fool's joke, one great day to pick, right? April Fool's Day. Anyway, it was not a joke. Japan did, in fact, make Bitcoin not legal tender, but they made Bitcoin legal for payment. There's a totally different deal between those two things. But I want to walk you through this article because this talks about everything happened. So it says Japan is set to begin recognizing Bitcoin as a legal method of payment starting tomorrow. Japan is set to begin recognizing Bitcoin as legal payment. The country's legislator, they passed a law following months of debate. Now, this took a lot of debating, but following months of that debate, they brought Bitcoin exchanges under the anti-money laundering know your customer rules while categorizing Bitcoin as a kind of a prepayment instrument. Now, it's a debate that began in the wake of the collapse of Mt. Gox. And if many of you know, Mt. Gox was the big exchange we had at the very beginning, and it collapsed. Now that it was defunct, that exchange shuttered after months of growing complications and, in the end, revelations of insolvency and alleged fraud. Now, according to Japanese financial services agencies, this is the FSA, sort of like our regulatory agencies, that law went into effect on April 1st, putting in place capital requirements for exchanges as well as cybersecurity and operational stipulations. In addition, those exchanges that were there in Japan will also be required to conduct employee training programs and submit to annual audits. Yet, there may be more work in this area. It said, for example, Nomura Research Institute, Yasutaka, if I get that right, Okano, indicated in May 2016 report that other Japanese laws may need to change to account for the tech, including the Bank Act and Financial Instruments and Exchange Act. And this is something that you guys need to understand when it comes to making Bitcoin legal tender. There's so many laws, rules, and regulations that would have to change to make this possible. It is not going to be an easy thing to do and to overcome to make that happen. Now, if you know, 4 years almost to the date after Japan made it legal payment, and there's a lot of work leading up to what you see, what you're going to see on the screen, is Nayib Bukele. He is the president, if you want to call him president, of El Salvador. He tweeted this out, and he did this on June 9th, 2021, some 4 years after Japan, right? The Bitcoin law has been approved by a supermajority in the Salvadorian Congress. 62 out of the 84 votes. History, Bitcoin, right? And he shows a little symbol with the El Salvador flag. This was big news. Why? Because in El Salvador, they use the US dollar as their currency, but Bitcoin is now legally on par with the US dollar. That was really big news. And a lot of work went to make that happen, and a lot of people were responsible for making that happen. Okay, so now let's take a look. Bitcoin adoption. What exactly is legal tender? That's what we have to ask, and that's what I started asking myself. When you look at all of this, all the effort that's going in, specifically here in the US, you have to ask yourself, what exactly is legal tender? This is a really good article, and I really want to take my time going through it because I want you to really understand this because it's huge. So the first takeaway from this article, it says legal tender is a national accepted medium of exchange. And remember, money moves through 3 phases. Andreas Antonopoulos said 4 phases, right? First, it's a store of value. And that's where Bitcoin has been here in the US as a store of value and in a lot of places around the globe. And it's having to prove that use case first. Can it truly be a store of value? Some people say yes, other people say no. The way I look at it, Bitcoin, when it first came into existence 14 years ago, was worth $0. Today, it's worth $23,000. Is that a store of value? Yes, based on that time frame I just gave you, 14 years, it has proven itself to be a store of value. Is it volatile? Of course it is. It depends on your time frame, right? So that's what I look at. So the first is store of value. Next is medium of exchange, and this is the part where we start seeing Bitcoin being used as legal tender or used for currency or used for payment, and we're seeing that happen. 4 years ago, or 5 years ago at this point, it was legal payment in Japan, and also in the US and the UK and some other places, you can actually buy goods and services, use Bitcoin to do that with, right? So it's solving that store of value, medium of exchange. Then you have unit of account, and that's what we're waiting on. In order for Bitcoin to be used as a unit of account, we're going to need to see Bitcoin be incredibly stable. It's got to be a stable coin. A lot of people back in the day used to say this would happen when Bitcoin crossed $1 million, because after it crosses $1 million of Bitcoin, any fluctuation normally won't be felt, right? So if it goes from 1 million to 1.2 million, or if it goes from 1 million to 800,000, pretty much the same, right? And as it goes higher, if it's 5 million, 10 million, $100 million hyper Bitcoinization, it's going to be an incredible stable unit of account. And that will probably be delineated in the smallest unit of a Bitcoin called a Satoshi. So back to the key takeaway. Legal tender is a nationally accepted medium of exchange that is issued by the national government. Now, issued by the national government. Can Bitcoin be issued by the national government? No, it can't be. It's a decentralized, censorship-resistant technology that the government can't. So as you can see, language is going to have to change in the laws when it comes to legal tender. However, some nations with weaker economies and hyperinflation are forced to rely on and use currencies of other stronger economies, such as the US as legal tender, right? So I got thinking about this, and I decided to pull up countries that are using the US dollar. And as you can see here, the first Federal Reserve note was issued 1 year after the Federal Reserve was formed, and the Federal Reserve is not a government entity. The Federal Reserve is a private company that has a private-public partnership with the US government. 5 US territories and 11 foreign nations use the US dollar as their official currency. Okay, and I'm gonna sort of skip down because I do want to tell you what these 11 are. So let's scroll all the way down, and which countries use the dollar as their official currency. In addition to 5 US territories, 11 countries adopted the US dollar as their official currency. Ecuador, El Salvador, of course, is now also using Bitcoin as legal tender. Zimbabwe, the British Virgin Islands, the Turks and Cayos, Timor and Leste, Bonaire, Micronesia, Palau, Marshall Islands, and Panama. And if you know, Marshall Islands were working on their own digital asset that they were going to make legal tender, which was called the Sovereign, but that's vanished. That's gone away, right? So if we go back up, it also says that the US dollar is also used with local currencies in several different popular tourist destinations, and the Bretton Woods agreements pegged foreign currencies to the US dollar to promote an efficient international monetary system. Now, it says when the Bretton Woods Agreement terminated in 1973, the US dollar remained the reserve currency for most nations. All right, now let's go back and take a look at our key takeaways from this other article. The rising awareness of cryptocurrencies has caused these nation states with weaker economies to consider alternatives to fiat currencies. And the obvious first choice seems to be Bitcoin. And this is why El Salvador chose Bitcoin to be legal tender, because it's obvious. It's decentralized, censorship resistant, and it has a robust network that has been in operation for the past 14 years with a 99.999% uptime. Hasn't went down. Recently, the Central American nation El Salvador accepted Bitcoin as legal tender, becoming the first nation worldwide to do so. But the question still remains, can Bitcoin make a suitable legal tender? And El Salvador is on display for the world to see if this is truly going to work. Now, if you've been paying attention to the news cycle, you'll know that Bukele came out, slammed the media, said you guys are ignoring the fact that we paid off an $800 million bond that we had, even with us adopting Bitcoin as our legal tender. And so there was some rift that was going on about this, but it seems like El Salvador is still doing okay, even though they've started putting money into Bitcoin. They're launching a Bitcoin bond and they're building a Bitcoin city. Seems like it's going pretty good, right? Yeah, that's what I thought. The last key takeaway is in this article, we'll understand the meaning of legal tender, dive into why countries consider making other countries legal tender their own, and can Bitcoin make a suitable legal tender alternative to state-backed currencies? Now, El Salvador has made Bitcoin legal tender, but what is legal tender, and can we use Bitcoin? For most of us, stable economies, losing a part or whole of the value of our lifelong savings overnight can be an alien concept. It's totally alien in the United States. Whenever have we ever feared that we would lose our life savings by having our money in US dollars? Never, never, ever, ever. And even though a lot of people will dog the US and dog our government and dog the way systems work and dog the US dollar, still, no one has that fear. In fact, a lot of people here in the United States will say, what? We're not worried about that. We have the FDIC. When have we ever had to use the FDIC? Never, right? So this is a alien concept, foreign concept to us to even think that this would ever happen. It goes on and says it may sound strange to use some other country's legal tender as our own, but that's the fate millions of people from smaller developing economies face. To blame, we have hyperinflation. Now, hyperinflation and the need for new legal tender. If you were a citizen of Zimbabwe around 2007, 2008, all of your savings in Zimbabwean dollars would have lost 99.99% of its value in 2009, effectively going to zero, courtesy of an inflation rate as high as 5 billion%. So while you'd still have notes of 10 and 100 Zimbabwean dollars, the country would be issuing trillion-dollar bills such as the one below. Similar to Zimbabwe, the unstable economies of many developing countries push them to rely on one or multiple foreign currencies instead of their own. Very often, the obvious option for them is to use the world's reserve currency, the US dollar, as legal tender. Today, countries like, and I mentioned these before, El Salvador, Zimbabwe, Puerto Rico, Panama, officially use the US dollar as legal tender. But cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin are starting to turn the tide. Governments of developing nations are considering adopting Bitcoin as legal tender instead of using the US dollar or any other state-backed currency. For most people, this change begs the question, what makes Bitcoin a suitable legal tender for national economies. I don't know of any nation yet that has said they're just solely going to rely only on Bitcoin. That is going to be a statement of all statements when it happens, and I do believe it will happen. So let's dive into this. But first, let's understand what legal tender is. What is legal tender? You wake up in the morning, you go for a run, or on your way back, stop at Starbucks, grab a morning latte, then you stop by the grocery store to buy some cereal, bread, and milk. I don't do any of that. What you use to settle these transactions depends on where you're living. If you're in the US, you use the US dollar, of course. Anywhere in Europe, you're going to use the euro. Or if you're in El Salvador, then you have a couple of options: US dollar, or in this case, Bitcoin. And that is what the legal tender of your current country is. To put it simply, a legal tender is anything that the governing body of a country legally accepts as a suitable medium of exchange for settling all kinds of transactions within the country. Besides, the law may also restrict citizens from using anything other than specific legal tender as a medium of exchange with respect to countries. I'm going to get into this some with an interview that Peter McCormick did with Aaron Daniels. He's an appellate attorney, and I will get into that as far as it applies to here in the US. However, a country may not always print its own legal tender. Get this. As in the case of the dollarized economy, such as that of El Salvador, they can't print dollars. They have to depend on us. Instead, other countries with a more stable economy, like the US, may print and delegate its currency for the citizens to have a more stable medium of exchange. Right? You had the Fed, money printer go burr, baby. They was printing like crazy, right? Now, here's the problem with existing legal tenders. The value of traditional legal tenders is governed by how well a government is performing and how effective its policies are, both domestically and internationally. If your government fails to perform well by international standards, the value of the currency can fall drastically, causing high levels of inflation. Besides, fiat currencies as legal tenders offer limited flexibilities as they are centered around a central entity and are accepted only within specific geographical boundaries. Further, countries that use currencies of other nations as their legal tender are only burdened with more economic pressure, pushing them into a spiral of never-ending economic misery. This is leading a number of countries to consider Bitcoin as a more flexible alternative. So let's take a look at what's so attractive about Bitcoin. Is Bitcoin suitable legal tender? Since El Salvador accepted Bitcoin as legal tender, the arguments about Bitcoin's effectiveness as legal tender have grown intense. Some believe Bitcoin as a medium of exchange is highly risky for common people due to short-term BTC price volatility. Others say that Bitcoin is not for everyone, as not everyone can afford to pay its high transaction fees. Now, this was back when transaction fees for Bitcoin was high. Right now, those fees, I believe, have come down quite considerably and is pretty stable. Besides, the mainstream media has made quite apparent that Bitcoin consumes electricity equivalent to some nation states, which we've all debunked. The whole ESG deal, Michael Saylor just had Q4 of the Bitcoin Mining Council totally debunked anything about how much electricity Bitcoin mining consumes. Get that out of our heads. Now, some also fear that Bitcoin's anonymity will offer criminals a safe circle to exchange money and fund illegal activities. We know that has also been debunked. So, given these concerns, which are not concerns, does it make sense to use Bitcoin's legal tender? It does. There's no straightforward answer to that, even though we do have an answer for that now. But there are some solid reasons why Bitcoin can actually be an effective legal tender. But there are also drawbacks. We can take a look at both. Now, what makes Bitcoin an effective legal tender? Here are 5 points on what it can. I won't read all of this. Resistant to inflation, efficient use of account, efficient unit account, fast and cheap transactions, easy and on track to becoming green. Oh, 6th one, transparent, of course. Yes, anything you do on the Bitcoin blockchain is transparent. One of the actual both pros and cons of Bitcoin. Listen, I don't want someone tracking every transaction I do in public. And if you do that on the Bitcoin blockchain, and once you tie your identity to it, they can see every transaction you've ever done. But thank goodness for Taproot and Snore signatures, which is going to start bringing privacy to Bitcoin. And hopefully we'll see Bitcoin become that platform that we can do transactions on and still maintain our privacy. And privacy is important. As you know, we discussed that 2 weeks ago. Now, there are some downsides to Bitcoin as legal tender. The volatility, of course, is what this article talks about. And again, for me, also the privacy aspect does it. Now, can the future be Bitcoin? And of course, I would say the future can be Bitcoin, and it will be Bitcoin. So let's take a look. We just got done with that one. Let's take a look at this. Now, after El Salvador did this, back in 2021, then we get to 2022. Well, at the very beginning of 2022, Senator Wendy, and I'm going to forget her name now, she also submitted a bill in 2022 saying that she wanted to make Bitcoin legal tender. Well, guess what? That didn't make it, and that got shot down for the most part. But this article 12 months ago, like I said, almost to the date, Arizona introduced a bill to make Bitcoin legal tender. And as a result of doing this, it created a bunch of stir amongst the internet, a lot of it on Twitter, and for good reasons. But let's take a look at sort of what the article said. It says, but if true, and you got to understand, back then, everyone was skeptical about things like this, trying to make Bitcoin legal tender in the United States. Yeah, everybody's like, sure, gotcha. But did Arizona one up every other Bitcoiner state? A bill that seeks to make Bitcoin legal tender in the state is circulating through Twitter and Telegram groups. Doubt is still in the air, and there's no official confirmation. But the document seems to exist, and even though it's just a bill and there's no guarantees of pass, this may be the most important Bitcoin news of the year so far. Now, again, remember, kicking this off. Now, this is where it begins to get interesting. It was Dennis Porter who came out and made this announcement and said, breaking, Arizona introduces a bill to make Bitcoin legal tender. And right after that, a lot of flurry of conversation started up. And I'm just scrolling through some of this so that you can see some of the things the rest of this article was talking about. And it talked about, is there a precedent to the legal tender bill? And it says, this gives credence to the news. Arizona's been trying to pass some kind of Bitcoin bill for a while. And as far as we can tell, the idea goes back to 2018. In March, Crypto Economy article, everyone seemed hopeful. The state of Arizona is likely to become the first to pass a law permitting residents to pay their taxes and other charges to the government with Bitcoin. The Arizona House of Representatives will be deliberating on the issue this week. The House Ways and Means Committee is advocating the advancement of the bill, which has already been passed by the state Senate. This is according to public records released March 7th. Now, of course, we know that didn't happen, and that's why this bill was being put back again. And Jeff Booth said this: states and countries are starting to figure out the best way to attract talent and build prosperity for their citizens is to advocate for a free market, game theory accelerating a competition for the best and brightest. So as you can see, a lot of people were really hyped up about this, and Twitter was on fire. Everything was on fire talking about it, right? So then we looked at the next thing that happened. After Arizona sort of made their statement about accepting Bitcoin as legal tender, Tonga came out and said, oh crap, Arizona beat us to it by 8 months. So Tonga is coming out saying they want to make Bitcoin legal tender, right? But as you can see, Fusitu, I think that's the way you pronounce his name, showed you that, listen, here's our bill that says, well, I think he actually showed the bill from Arizona, but he's also saying that we are looking right here, strictly speaking, the Constitution of Tonga and the House rules of the Legislative Assembly of the Kingdom of Tonga are taking 8 months as they govern when Parliament convenes and when private members' bills are allowed to be tabled in the House for debate. So they had a bill they were going to push out to make Bitcoin legal tender as well. Now, this is Dennis coming out. After that, you got to realize back at the beginning of 2022, everything was about Bitcoin being legal tender, and a lot of work and effort was going into making this happen. All throughout 2022, there was a lot of effort. So Dennis came out and said, breaking, the state of California is introducing a bill to make Bitcoin legal tender. I mean, things were popping off like crazy about this, and it just seemed like every day we were getting news about somebody else trying to make Bitcoin legal tender. Now, Dennis caught a lot of flack about this because, again, as you can imagine, it didn't happen, right? And so there's an article about this. New bill could make Bitcoin legal tender in California. That's right. And so let's take a look at sort of what was mentioned here. Now, California can make Bitcoin legal tender. There was a new bill introduced by political advisors. Now, neither one of these gentlemen were members of a political party. I mean, not political party. They weren't members of the actual legislature, but they were advisors. So Bitcoin experts Dennis Porter and political advisor N.C. Calderon, who was a former state house legislator, they've collaborated, drafted a new proposal that could possibly make Bitcoin legal tender by their own opinion. And this is after Arizona and the island of Tonga had recently hit the headlines with their possible move to make it legal tender. So again, everything was talking about making Bitcoin a legal tender. Now, Neil Jacobs is a little bit of the antagonist here. And he says, when the candidate running for U.S. Congress fact checks the influencer, thanks for clarification, Erica. Now, Erica came out, and at first, she was not a big fan of this whole making Bitcoin legal tender deal. As you can see, she tweeted, people are asking me about this. And remember, she was running to represent California 32, the 32nd district in California, which she did not win. She lost to, as Travis Clean liked to say, punk ass Brad Sherman. But she says, people are asking me about this as if this is a bill he is referring to. It states a state agency may accept cryptocurrency as a method of payment for the provision of government services. It is not suggesting making BTC an official legal currency. And again, we go back to what we said before. Like in Japan, they made it legal to use Bitcoin as a payment, but it wasn't legal tender. And that's the way we have to look at this. And this is sort of what this bill was actually doing. It wasn't really pushing to make it legal tender. So again, when that did not work, Neil came out and says, breaking, Dennis Porter did not mislead people about the mysterious California Bitcoin legal tender bill he said was introduced. It was me who crippled California adopting bill as legal tender because I asked to see the bill. You can't make this crap up, right? And so it's true. Again, it wasn't about making it legal tender, about making it illegal to accept payment for taxes and to make payments to the government. There's a difference there. Legal tender is one of these things that only can be done by a government to issue, and they can't do that with Bitcoin. That's why it's such a Herculean effort to get Bitcoin to be legal tender in the US. There's so much that would have to change. It's not even funny, right? Now, again, you're looking at this progression build up, right? Then we had Samson Mow, who was very instrumental at making Bitcoin legal tender, along with Jack Mallers in El Salvador. He said, today is my last day with Blockstream. It has been a grand adventure working with Adam Back, of course, that's who that is, for the last 5 years. And together we've accomplished a great deal, from side chains to mines to satellites. So what's next? I plan to focus on nation state Bitcoin adoption. He goes on to say, Blockstream will continue to be a critical part of Bitcoin infrastructure development and layer 2 scaling techs like Liquid BTC and Lightning. I'm grateful to have a hand in bringing so many product services to market. And though I'm leaving, I'll still be a Blockstream spy. I'll continue to support and advocate for Liquid, and as I believe it has an important role to play in the reformation of legacy financial systems. Maybe some of you don't know, but I joined Liquid while COO of the BTC China exchange long before I was at Blockstream. With everything that's happening at light speed in El Salvador and more countries interested in adopting Bitcoin, I found my time each day just no longer enough anymore. Also, as Infinite Fleet nears beta, more of my attention is being demanded by the Pixelmatic team. So he's working with other teams, stuff like that. He goes on and says a few other stuff, but the main point here is knowing that Samson Mow left Blockstream and is now using his company JN3 to adopt Bitcoin, and some of that is adopting Bitcoin as legal tender. So 10 countries that can make Bitcoin legal tender in 2022. We know Most of this did not happen. And I'll scroll down and I'll work my way back up. So the first one, of course, was Tonga, right? Their GDP is 510 million. Note, all of these places are incredibly small. There is no G20 level nation ever considering thinking about making Bitcoin legal tender. This is all of the developing nations, and they're very, very small, which gives them the flexibility and autonomy to do something like making Bitcoin legal tender. So for Tonga, Lord Fuitsu, if I pronounce his name wrong, and I'm sorry if I'm messing it all up, which I probably am, has been a huge Bitcoin proponent for the small island nation. See, small island. Reports see Tonga making Bitcoin legal tender for the nation by 2022 or 2023. We're now in 2023, and I don't think it still has happened. Fusitu, former parliamentarian in Tonga, also sat in the historic Twitter spaces the night legal tender was passed in El Salvador. So he has always been a huge proponent of Bitcoin and has been in a lot of Twitter spaces. And so it only makes sense that he's been orange pill to the hilt, and he wants to make the same true there. Mexico is the next one. Samson Mao talked about the fact that there was a senator in Mexico that was pushing a bill to recognize Bitcoin's legal tender there. They have a 1.08 trillion GDP, a little bit bigger, right? As with El Salvador, Bitcoin as legal tender in Mexico would be massive. Around 50 billion in remittances are sent to Mexico each year. Adopting Bitcoin will lead to massive savings and transfer fees. And this was one of the things early, before we had all the other digital assets come about, crypto assets come about. A lot of people were talking about using Bitcoin as a the money that you send back and forth, remittances, right? Remittances was the place. And this is when XRP came up, and they were saying they were going to build this huge remittance network. This was before a lot of the other assets came about, talking about the same. So this is the angle that it was going for. Now, the Mexican Senator Indira Kempis is drafting legislation to make Bitcoin legal tender in the nation. Many speculate Mexico's next on list for adoption in 2022, with some on Twitter speculating Mexico will announce it at the conference. This, again, did not happen. Brazil, 1.4 trillion. They also were talking about allocating their reserves to Bitcoin and then making Bitcoin legal tender. It was Coinbase's CEO recently came out and said both Argentina and Brazil should make Bitcoin legal tender and adopt it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there in Brazil. I'll run through some more of these. We've got Nigeria. They're at a $432 billion GDP. Ecuador, $98 billion GDP. Switzerland, who's next? Argentina, they're on the list. Ukraine, Russia, and of course, the US, which, boy, that would be hard to come by. Now, Mike Alford was talking about it's time to make legal tender nationwide and eliminate capital gains on Bitcoin in America. This was one of the big pushes why we wanted Bitcoin to be legal tender, is because if it's legal tender, what does it do? It gets rid of capital gains tax. This is one of the things that we, a lot of people make the assumption, hey, if El Salvador makes Bitcoin legal tender there, there's no capital gains tax on it. If it's true there, won't all of the rest of the globe have to also adopt it? And that's not true. It didn't have to happen that way. But the point is that we need to adopt this legal tender to get rid of capital gains tax. Now, here in the state of Texas, we don't get taxed because there's no state income tax, right? So if you're buying and selling digital assets in Texas, there's no capital gains because this is a state that doesn't have any capital gains. This is what Arizona is pushing for as well. If they do it in Arizona, make it legal tender there, then you're going to see it not be taxed like capital gains. And could you imagine if that begins to spread throughout the rest of the country? A lot of people were talking about moving away from the US for that purpose alone. The fact that they didn't want to be taxed on their crypto gains assets, capital gains assets. So this is what happened to people moving to Puerto Rico. And there's a lot of ways people are trying to address this capital gain issue because it is significant depending on when you bought your Bitcoin and how much you have. It can be a big deal. So taking a look at NPR, right? With federal rules unclear, some states carved their own path on cryptocurrencies. Now, while this is not directly talking about legal tender, but they are how are states dealing with digital assets. And I will want to read through some of this. So in Arizona, now again, this article was published back last year in March. So Arizona Republican Senator Wendy Rogers introduced legislation in January pushing to make one of the most popular cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, legal tender. It would amend what the state considered legal tender and would allow Bitcoin to be used for payments of debt, state taxes, and dues. A bill was introduced by Democratic Senator Sidney Kamlager. Now, if you remember, a lot of people were believing that Bitcoin leaned right? We thought it leaned a lot right. Most of the right-leaning folks were all about Bitcoin, but then you also have some Democratic policymakers, legislators, who are also about Bitcoin. And so this Democratic senator in California in February would allow the state to accept crypto payments for state services that included permits, DMV licenses, certificates, and state taxes. You go to Colorado and look at what Governor Jared Polis, he's a Democrat, he announced on social media that the state would begin to accept payments for state taxes and fees and hope to do so by the end of the summer of this year. Right? You have a lot of activity happening in so many states. In Ohio, they actually did, for a period of time, accept Bitcoin payments for taxes, but that got shut down. Wyoming, the state of all states that understands Bitcoin better than any other state in the nation, 4 members of the Wyoming state legislature have introduced a bill that would allow the state treasury to issue stablecoins, a cryptocurrency that attempts to offer price stability and, unlike popular cryptos such as Bitcoin or Ethereum, is backed by reserve assets such as the US dollar. This is where the stablecoin issue comes up. And right now, stablecoin legislation is top of the pile. It's getting the most attention, and it probably will be the first legislation we see that makes it through Congress and goes to the president's desk is going to be about stablecoins. So this is back to Samson Mao again, introducing nation-state adoption for Bitcoin 2022. Again, he did a huge sweep, and I did want to read, I think, one of the quotes that's on here. Yes, Bitcoin within Prospera operates as legal tender. That means no capital gains tax on Bitcoin. You can transact freely using BTC, and you can pay taxes and fees to the jurisdiction of BTC. So what happened is that Bitcoin is already legal tender in Honduras and Portugal. Both of those small, I forget how you want to call them, countries, so to speak, are now have it as legal tender. So El Salvador, Honduras, and Portugal, 3 places that actually have Bitcoin as legal tender. And we believe that that's going to continue to progress, and more smaller nations, especially places that have hyperinflation, might turn to Bitcoin. And so this is, again, Dennis talking about the senator in Mexico. And then this came about, and this is from Cyber Hokey. And what he said is very interesting. This is the opposite side of what I've been talking about so far, advocating for Bitcoin being legal tender. He says, why does Bitcoin need to be legal tender status? The entire point of Bitcoin is it doesn't need approval and cannot be stopped by nation states. You guys continue to lose the plot every day, he says. Coercive legal tender laws isn't a win for anyone. Only bag holders desiring number go up. And the reason that he says that is because what a lot of people were believing and a lot of people were advocating for is that the more mass adoption we get of Bitcoin, then the better it'll be, number goes up. Because of that, what Robert Breedlove said, 21 million fixed supply plus massive demand equals number goes up. We'll see if that continues to pan out. Probably not. So Dennis comes out again. This is now in April, as you can see, January, February, March, April. We're up in April, almost toward the end of April. Massive breaking news. The nation of Panama has officially passed a bill to give legal status to Bitcoin, as well as eliminate all capital gains. And this is the deal, capital gains tax, by making it legal tender or making it legal status, you're getting rid of those capital gains tax. And again, Twitter sphere went crazy. A lot of people celebrated. Some people were upset. It was all over the place. Now, there was a great podcast that was done in July by What Bitcoin Did, Peter McCormick. He was hosting Aaron Daniel. And Aaron Daniel is an appellate attorney. And so he was going through talking about what Bitcoin as a legal tender means and if we actually needed that. Now, he says here, we all want freedom. That's why Bitcoin exists, is to be apolitical freedom money, separate from the state, right? So we all want this freedom. We want Bitcoin to exist. That's why it exists, apolitical, and we want it to be separate from the state. And when you start to then advocate for the state to come and be involved in your freedom, money, I hate the phrase slippery slope, but it starts to be a slippery slope, right? And that's the problem that we have, is when you start looking at this, Bitcoin being a legal tender, it's a slippery slope to get the government now involved in Bitcoin in ways that they really should not be involved in Bitcoin, right? And that's not good for us, and that's not good at all. So again, the debate and the question still is, should Bitcoin be legal tender? Does it need to be legal tender? And I definitely would want you guys to, this is the actual video of it. I was going to try to play a small portion of it, and I might still try to. Let's see if I can, where he begins to talk about this. So let me see with my producer if this is going to be heard. You can let me know if this is going to work, Nick, if I play this. So I'm going to go ahead and start playing it, and let's see if you guys can hear it. Okay, I don't think you guys are going to be able to hear the sound of that, but at any rate, one of the things that Aaron Daniel was talking about, and that's the part that I want you guys to hear, was this. He says that in Article 1, Section 10 describes what can be legal tender, and I'll read this for you. It says that no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque and reprisal, coin money. That's it right there, coin money. Emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. So can you imagine having to amend the Constitution to be able to say that we can make Bitcoin legal tender? This is a monumental effort to get something like that to happen. So let's just say probably won't happen anytime soon. Now, with that, there are some states where gold and silver have become legal tender, right? So if you look down here, an encouraging victory for sound money has just taken place in West Virginia, where they now have announced plans to remove taxation on precious metals as of July 1st, 2019. Louisiana, Utah, and Texas have passed legislation in gold and silver as legal tender, a move that allows citizens to make transactions using precious metals in place of cash, joining 7 other states that have either passed or introduced legislation in favor of metals. Louisiana and Texas are now further steps toward establishing regulatory deposits to hold gold and silver. So, for those gold and silver bugs out there, yes, you can in fact use those metals as legal tender in certain states. Where does Bitcoin sit in this? Will we eventually see Bitcoin having the same status as legal tender? I believe it might happen, but it's not going to happen the way by the Constitution. It might not happen the way we think it normally would. I think there might be some event that might happen that might completely change the way Bitcoin is viewed and how it's adopted and how it's accepted. I don't know. That's just me. I could be an optimist. So outside of the US, there are 15 countries where Bitcoin is legal and illegal. And let's take a look at these real fast. Let me scroll down. 15 countries where Bitcoin is legal and illegal. So starting with number 15, the People's Republic of China. Bitcoin legal or illegal? It's illegal. But here's the funny thing. Today, an article came out that says that the Chinese government is going to start taxing Bitcoin miners. But I thought Bitcoin miners weren't allowed in China. Imagine that, huh? The state of Qatar, it's illegal. Kingdom of Belgium, it's legal. The Kingdom of Belgium is a Northern European country with a relatively high GDP per capita. Cryptocurrencies are not outlawed by Belgium, and there are no significant barriers to either mining Bitcoin or others or using them for transactions. However, Bitcoin is not legal tender in the country. And again, it's that difference between legal tender and if it's being legal. Okay. Number 12, Republic of Ireland. It is legal there. The Republic of Ireland is a sovereign state in Europe with a high income and one that is often criticized for its loose tax laws. There is no ban against either Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies in the country, and the only regulations covering Bitcoin are those that are in place in the entire European Union. And as you know, right now, the EU is going through a huge deal when it comes to regulation of digital assets or crypto assets, however you want to. Taxes on Bitcoin are subject to the nature of the transaction, and the rates vary as if it is regularly used or if rarely used. New Zealand, it's legal. So New Zealand is an island nation in the Pacific Ocean. There is no specific legislation that bans the mining or trading of Bitcoin in the country. However, like others, New Zealand also taxes cryptocurrency transactions. So don't go moving to New Zealand thinking you're gonna get away from taxes. You're not. Exchanges and other businesses must obtain a license from the government before providing services. We just saw Coinbase get hit with a fine because they were operating without a license, which someone mentioned on LinkedIn to me. They were like, can you ever believe that Coinbase would do a rookie move like that and not be registered? But that didn't make sense. I think there's more to that story than meets the eye. The Commonwealth of Australia, it's legal. It's an oceanic country that is rich in natural resources. There are no laws against either mining or transacting in Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency in Australia. However, it's not equal to money in the country. Instead, the law treats Bitcoin as an asset that is held, and for companies, this includes taxation if the Bitcoin is part of daily operation or has been bought with the intent of making a profit. You got the Netherlands, where our producer is. It's legal there. Glad for that. It's a Northern European country that is one of the most prosperous regions in the world. The country does not have any specific laws to regulate cryptocurrencies, and Bitcoin, along with others, generally has to follow the same regulatory framework for other financial products. Now, the Dutch government also requires that Bitcoin should be disclosed on the annual tax return and that a capital gains tax will be applied to them. This is where Coinbase just got dinged and got fined by the Dutch government. Swiss Confederation, it's legal there. They're commonly known as Switzerland. It's a landlocked European country with a high standard of living. Cryptocurrencies are classified as intangible assets in Swiss law, are not legal tender, and have no specific laws against it. On the individual level, Switzerland does not tax cryptocurrency on any capital gains. So you want to move somewhere, no taxes, go to Switzerland. However, the tax assessment, they must convert to the Swiss franc at the year's end at a rate provided by the government. You got the Federal Republic of Germany, it's legal there. And I'll just run through the rest of these. You got UK, Great Britain, Northern Ireland, illegal there. Yeah, and that's 6. Let me get on down to the rest. It ended there at 6. I don't know why I did. I thought I was going to list the top 5. Oh, here we go. Continue reading. Let's close this. Okay, here we go. 5 countries, because I do want to get through all of these. French Republic, it's legal there. Let's scroll down. They screwed me up, guys. Canada, it's legal there. United States, of course, is legal here. Central African Republic. Now, Central African Republic just made Bitcoin legal tender there in the country. Not just legal, but legal tender. Note, this article is written, it was published January 13th, but I think that it is legal tender there. It's the latest kind of adopted Bitcoin. Yeah, there you go. That is adopted as legal tender, which means that instead of an asset, the currency is not allowed to be used to make purchases. However, the decision itself is controversial, blah, blah, blah. So it is legal tender in the Central African Republic. And then you got the Republic, of course, of El Salvador, and it's, of course, legal tender there. So, and here you go. And this is the article that was talking about them making it legal tender in April. And this was April. The country which made it, that was April of last year, I believe, that they made it legal tender, not this April, because we're not in April yet. So yeah, there's another one. So as you can see, this small little march up, country by country, smaller countries are starting to make Bitcoin legal tender. And it is going to be interesting to see what happens when we get to the G20 nations and to see how they deal with it. And this is, again, what I mentioned before, Coinbase CEO saying, make it legal tender in Brazil and Argentina. Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong tweeted that Bitcoin may be the right long-term bet for the 2 South American countries currently seeking a common currency. And he goes on to there and talks, this article sort of outlines. And now Milky said this: anyone who thinks Bitcoin can ever be a fiat replacement doesn't understand Bitcoin is. The only real world use for Bitcoin can have a store value to back currency valuation like gold used to be. And this guy, the CEO of Coinbase, says everything really. So again, you have your people that have different points of view on this. Some people think it's useless to try to make Bitcoin legal tender. That's not what it was created for. And then you have other people that are trying to push really hard, like Samson Mao, to get nations to adopt it and make it legal tender. We will see how this all pans out. Last but not least, brings us back to current day today, and bingo, here you go. Now, some people are making this to be very controversial. Decrypt's headline is making somewhat controversial. Right-wing Arizona senator pushes to recognize Bitcoin legal tender. Their subtitle tells you everything you need to know. A self-professed member of Oath Keepers, Arizona Senator Wendy Rogers, proposes several amendments, including making Bitcoin legal tender. So what I told someone on LinkedIn, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Let's not, of course, she's someone who's very right, extreme right leaning, doesn't mean that her efforts to make Bitcoin legal tender should be swatted away or ignored or whatever. But again, there is still this debate that's out there. Should it be legal tender? Should it not be? Does it need to be? And I think that's where we are going to continue to grapple with that throughout 2023 and beyond, because until something changes, there is going to be this issue of Bitcoin's being legal tender and how we use it, specifically the capital gains part. I don't know of anyone today who's just clawing to pay their taxes in Bitcoin. Not me, not ever, not interested in it, right? Here in the developed nation, we have so many ways to make payments. I'm not using my Bitcoin to do that. Now, the only place where you might consider doing something like that is that if you can do that and not get hit with capital gains tax, and it might be a benefit to pay in Bitcoin because you're not going to get hit with capital gains tax. Because if you sold it and then paid taxes, it doesn't make sense, right? So things of that nature, if I can begin to use Bitcoin, not get hit with capital gains tax, and pay for things, you might be onto something. And there are some bills that are saying just that. You have the de minimis rule, and a lot of the bills that were in Congress, they started out with, I think it was like 800, went to 600, went to 200, went to 50, right? Okay, that's just dumb. Yeah, if you want to use Bitcoin, buy a cup of coffee, but I'm not interested in doing that, right? If I can make a large purchase with Bitcoin that I'm not going to get hit with capital gains tax, then game on. Hey, can I use the Bitcoin to buy a property? Can I use Bitcoin to buy a vehicle? Can I use Bitcoin to buy land? Sure. Okay. Then maybe I'd consider doing something like that. Otherwise, not interested in it. Okay. So that's my little deal with that. Let me pull up my website for you guys so you can see. I curate news every day, putting the top 3 most covered news articles right up front. That way you'll know what's being covered the most throughout the day. And then I have a link right there to my daily brief. You guys can actually click on that. You'll get let me see if I click on it. I think it'll open a new window. It'll redirect you to Publish 0x. Publish 0x is a wonderful blogging platform. You can blog on there. And so as you can see right there, Coinbase got fined 3.6 million in the Netherlands. And then you'll get the rest of all the news. I put it in narration form. That way you guys will have the ability to sort of read through it. Also, you can easily be able to see the top video of the day, normally a theme song, sometimes Altcoin Daily, Trader University, right? Or some of the podcasts, I'll put them there. And then for you to listen to the podcast of the day. Are we in a bull trap? Are we in a bear market, bull market? Van Spencer talks about that on Bankless. So that gives you a little bit of that. I put that also down here for the video and the podcast, and then my 2 shows, along with some other information that you might want to check out. Folks, that was a lot of stuff, and I don't know if I was prepared to really go through all of that. But my main point that I want you to understand is that this topic of making Bitcoin legal tender, it's literally all over the place, right? And so you've got states trying to do it. You've got countries trying to do it. El Salvador will continue to be the spotlight to see how it goes in El Salvador. As the price of Bitcoin skyrockets, it's going to put El Salvador in a really good light financially. They're working on the Bitcoin city. They got the Bitcoin bond. A lot of good things very well can happen. And as a result of that happening, we might see more and more nations. I wouldn't be shocked if we see Bitcoin price run back up to $50,000 by the end of the year, I wouldn't be shocked to see Argentina and Brazil kick in Bitcoin as legal tender. I wouldn't be shocked to see some of the other nations that we just talked about kick it in. And as those nations begin to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, I think some of the other developed nations, not even the G20, will start paying attention, and then ultimately it'll sprout up to the G20 folks. And I think that'll come about through various ways. Bitcoin mining, putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Here in Texas, there is a conversation about Bitcoin being held in the state of Texas reserves. If that happens, that's going to change the game. You've got folks up in New Hampshire. They were talking about using Bitcoin mining for the electric grid. You got Missouri and you got Mississippi, both looking at making sure that people can mine and run nodes in those states. A lot of activity, right, happening around Bitcoin and its status as to how we handle it. And my hope is that this continues to progress. I know a lot of you are not game for this, but please reach out to your representatives. If you live in these people who are advocating for Bitcoin, any shape, form, or fashion, please reach out to them and communicate with them. For those who are not on board, please work to orange pill them. If we can get these folks orange pilled, right, then they will maybe wise up and also begin to advocate for Bitcoin. The 118th Congress has a big job on its hands. Will it be able to actually get a bill passed through and get to the president's desk and have him sign it? I'm doubtful, but maybe they will. And if they don't, guess what? The next Congress will. And so with that, I'm going to say that's all I got for you guys today. I will quit rambling, let you get on with your day. Thank you for watching. If, again, you haven't had the opportunity to go to Round the X, please do use Bitcoin Politics and you'll get $4 in Bitcoin. Please like and subscribe these videos so that more people can be aware of them. We really appreciate it. Thanks to my wonderful producer, Nick, for putting this together. I thank you so much. And you guys have a great day.